This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. It's a tired, worn statement. The three toughest jobs out there: firefighter, police officer, and school teacher. In each one of those categories, you talk about underpaid, underappreciated, abused, all the sorts of things that come along with that territory. I can't speak to teaching public school. I can speak to, being a college professor. It ain't the same thing, trust me. But I'm married to a public school teacher, former public school teacher now, which I'm very happy about because I get to be with her all the time. But I would listen to her as she would come home in the evenings, dog-tired, underappreciated, and anxious for what would happen the next day at work. And it was like every day was like that. It almost became a running joke for us. What do you have to overcome today, hon, in order to get back home to me? There are times when you think about that, and you might say it with a bit of levity, but there are times when people that work in public service, they don't come home. They don't see their babies anymore. They don't see their spouse. They don't see those that they love. They pour themselves into a job that is thankless, only to be discarded. Today, we're going to talk about a woman who poured her heart and soul into teaching public school, into teaching individuals Spanish, a language which was her first language, a woman that had carved out a life here in the United States. A woman who met her end on a dark trail in a little town in Iowa. Her name? Nohema Graber. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. My precious wife spent many, many years teaching in public schools. And when this case came about for me, I knew that it was something that I wanted to address and talk about the forensics of it. But, I also wanted to mention the life of Miss Graber and what she had endured.
Joe, Nohema Graber is a much beloved Spanish teacher at Fairfield High School. Students say she is tough, but fair, and they like her. When she goes missing during her everyday after-school walk in the park, the small town of Fairfield, Iowa is worried. When the body of Nohema Graber is found in the park hidden under a tarp, the town of less than 10,000 is shocked. But when two 16-year-old students are arrested for the murder after one of them writes on Snapchat about the planning, execution, and disposal of evidence, worry and shock turns to disgust.
Before I go down that path, I wanted to mention something to you that had occurred to me. I've shared a few things along the line with you about my background and about what my world was like as a death investigator. Based upon what we know of this case to start off with, what do you think was the modality of death in the first homicide case I ever worked?
I'm clueless. I have no idea. Baseball bat to the side of the head.
All over the head. I had a guy that beat his brother to death with a baseball bat. That was the very first homicide I ever worked. And I don't know if it's something in the back of my mind, coupled along with this idea that this poor woman is a public educator, that it kind of hooked together in this weird way for me. But yeah, the first homicide I think a lot of people would think, oh yeah, Morgan, it's probably a gunshot wound.
Oh, I actually thought you were going to go Cain and Abel. I thought you were going biblical because,
Yeah, exactly.
Beat him upside the head.
Yeah, and no, it was a guy that had beaten his brother to death with a baseball bat in South Louisiana. And the reason he had done it is that he was the younger brother, the perpetrator was, and the older brother bullied the entire family.
Oh,
And had knocked his brother around. And these were older fellows. They were not young guys. And the younger brother finally had enough.
a lifetime of bullying.
Retrieved a baseball bat and beat his brother to death in the front yard of their home. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was the first case. So my first homicide was actually a blunt force trauma homicide. It was not a gunshot wound. It was not a stab wound. It was not poisoning. It was blunt force trauma with a baseball bat.
All right. So when you're dealing with this, and it goes back to your first case as a death investigator, you're already, every time there's a baseball bat in the head, because you're gonna, if you get into a fight with somebody, they can use a Louisville Slugger to do damage on your ribs, your legs, your arms, all of that. But ultimately, you're not going to die from getting hit in the shoulder.
No, you're not.
Getting hit in the head, though, with a baseball bat is going to be deadly.
It absolutely is. And it's a very intimate thing. Do you remember when we were kids, they would take an old car tire and cut it in half and nail it to a telephone pole? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And you would take swings on the tire, that half of tire. And, I actually had two buddies that were doing that, and they were taking turns. And guess what happened? My friend was standing too close to the other guy right behind him as he was swinging. The bat comes off of the tire and hits my friend right in the face and breaks his nose. So there's even that kind of secondary energy can be transferred with a baseball bat to a very focal area on that bat. So you're transferring all of that energy to one hey, you know what it's called? It's called sweet spot. And every bat has one. And so you might not hit it every single time, but boy, when you do, the level of damage that can be accomplished with this is beyond the pale.
We've got a story today, Joe Scott Morgan, that it is the fear of everybody who has a loved one that is a teacher.
Yes.
And I count myself as that. When I met your sweet wife, Kim, who I think her first and middle name is Sweet Wife. She got a 3 first name. It's not, Betty Lynn Thomas. It's Sweet Wife Kim. Because of students these days are different. I know that's something that tends to be said of every generation, but Joseph Scott Morgan, I have walked down the halls of public schools in the last 5 years doing career day and other things. And the noise I hear and the volume I hear coming from classrooms while teachers are teaching is something that we did not experience as children growing up in the public school system. Teachers now are faced with a much different day when they start teaching. And in this particular case, you have a teacher this is a woman, Nohema Graber, loved by the community, loved by her school, loved by her students. Even a student said she was hard. She was a hard teacher because she was teaching her native language. She was teaching Spanish, and she took great pride in teaching Spanish, but she was hard. That fear of any teacher that does their job and tries to raise children to a respectable level of accomplishment in that course. What happens when the students lose it and kill their teacher with a baseball bat? Because that's what happened, Joe.
This all boils down to a bad grade. And listen, I made my share. I made my share over the course of my academic career, to include college as well. But there's not a single bad grade that I didn't earn. I would have liked for someone to have waved a wand, and and the grade had been miraculously transformed for something that was a bit more acceptable and appealing. But of course, that's not the case. And it would seem to me that with Nohema, she had this ability to say, okay, this is the line in the sand. And if you cross this line in the sand, these are going to be the consequences. And isn't that kind of this theme that runs through nowadays. It seems like there are no consequences for your actions. And when you think about, what's going to happen if I do poorly in this class? Well, it's going to drop my GPA. Maybe the promise that I made to my parents is not going to be upheld because I haven't focused, I haven't asked for help, I don't understand what I'm being taught. And let me tell you something. It's not always the teacher's fault that you don't understand. It's the fact that you haven't applied yourself many times. But people, they want things handed to them. And in this case, I think that we've got not one but two perpetrators that kind of were singing that same tune along the way, that they felt like that this victim owed them something, and by extension, because of what happened and what this community was robbed of, I think they felt as though that the rest of the community owed them something too. And they were going to take their payment in blood. As we previously mentioned on multiple episodes, Dave, I think one of the problems that perpetrators encounter, and keep in mind, most of the time, we don't discuss the actions of professional hitmen on this podcast. We talk primarily about perpetrators who have no experience. Not only do they not have experience with homicides, they have experience with death. And you're faced with the proposition that, okay, I've committed a homicide. What in the world do I do with a body? But let's back up a little bit before we get there and just kind of go through kind of the timeline and what happened in this particular case.
Nohema Graber, 66-year-old Spanish teacher. She was well thought of, and I mean this in the broadest sense of the word. Even the students who had her for Spanish, said she was hard but fair. I get having that discussion, but raising your voice, arguing over a grade, it is usually pretty black and white. Either you got the answer right or you got it wrong on the test. Am I wrong in that? Am I missing something here?
No. You're absolutely right. And again, this goes to it fascinates me how students now talk to teachers as if they are a peer, and that's the strange thing, because generally you don't associate yourself with learning from peers. You learn from those that have mastered a craft, and unfortunately, most students don't understand that.
I actually got this quote. Well, there's this guy named Sawyer Mast. He was a student with our two suspects here, Jeremy Goodale and Willard Chaiden Miller. And he said, having known Chaiden and having him in my math class, he did not speak in a murderous way, but in a very aggressive way towards Mrs. Graber. Now, Sawyer Mast said he heard Chaiden Miller taking this tone, arguing over a grade in Spanish, 2 or 3, depending on. I'm not sure which one it was. But it was not just entry level of Spanish. It was a class that you're expected. You needed for college back in the day, where you had to have 2 years of a foreign language to get in. And so he's arguing, wanting a better. No, Joe. Arguing with the teacher over a grade?
She had told this young man that he is going to receive a particular grade, and he was dissatisfied with that. And that's where this idea, took root of, okay, well, I'm not going to try to do extra credit. I'm not going to beg to maybe retake an examination. I'm going to beat her to death. And that's, I don't know how you make that leap from here to here in that sense. And I don't know that there's really any way to excuse it. I think that some people have tried to apply, things like mental illness and all those sorts of things. And the thing about it is, okay, mental illness, maybe, but are we talking about two mentally ill people that enter into a confederacy with one another?
That's the thing. You've got two male friends get together. Apparently, my talk with Mrs. Graber didn't go as expected. I thought I could argue my way into a better grade. It didn't happen. So, Jeremy, what do you think I should do? And that's this conversation. What level do you go? You mentioned learning from peers and how they can talk to teachers now with disrespect, like they don't owe them any kind of respect. But this goes beyond that. This now goes past to, I need a much better grade than I got. She's not going to give it to me. What do you think I should do? Well, you got a baseball bat handy?
Yeah, let's disappear her. And so the choice that is made at this point is we need to try to plan how we can get rid of her. And now where this plan was going to go after that, I have no idea. What are you going to do? I mean, what's the deal here? Is this is this an idea of vengeance, or is it, okay, well, if we make her disappear, ergo the grades will disappear? Here's the thing. Even if you hadn't gotten caught at what you were doing, you're still going to get the same damn grade. That's how that's going to work out for you. I can tell you that. And so it comes down to an idea that I like to state over and over again, metaphorically, and it's throwing the brick through the stained glass window. That you're willing to destroy something so incredibly beautiful because it doesn't suit you. It doesn't suit who you are or what you are and that sort of thing. So you're now going to choose. And when perpetrators are trying to determine what type of weapon to utilize, well, what's at their disposal? Well, if you're talking a couple of teen boys, you would think, well, perhaps they're not going to have firearms at their disposal. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But you and I know, certainly you, I can speak to me, even in my limited sense, I had quite the collection of baseball bats when I was a kid. Still had them until, I reached college. I don't know whatever happened to them, but I had them. And so, you have those that are there. So it's a weapon of opportunity. But this is not, here's the other thing about this particular homicide, Dave, because we've talked about weapons of opportunity as it applies to when somebody's blood is up, as they say. If you have a reactive event within, say, a home, all right, you're going to pick up the weapon that is closest to you, and you're going to utilize it. Could be a gun, could be a knife, could be a blunt object. That's not what they did. They selected a weapon, and then after they had selected the weapon, they knew where she was going to be. So it's a matter of the perpetrators understanding the timeline as it applies to, we know that she leaves school at this particular time.
She has a regular routine.
She does, and it's something she follows. And they knew that this is her day. She goes and walks, to just kind of let her mind go. And then every day, you know what she went and did after that? She went to mass every day and she prayed. And that's every day of the week. She was that involved in her church. And so she would leave the walking path and go to mass. And people knew that about her.
The students knew. The two perpetrators here knew her routine of after school going to the park. They put together a minimal plan. They know where she's going to be by herself. They know the opportunity they will have. But beyond that, they don't really plan out a whole lot more, including what to do after we do the deed. They don't plan what to do with much else except this emotional desire to take her life. And they really don't get past that much. And then they use social media, Snapchat, to actually share information that they ought not know with other people, including a friend who is the reason we know what happened. Because she turned on them, because what they did was heinous. But the whole point being, they had a plan. It just wasn't a complete plan.
Yeah, it's one of these events where you think that maybe universal you believe that you've got everything planned out so that it's all going to come off without a problem. But when both Miller and Goodale showed up at the park, they were tracking her there at the park, and it's quite chilling. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, because Goodale actually approached her eye to eye, and he's wearing a mask, and she's quite taken aback by this. She's on this walking trail. Okay. It's this little this little park. Her car is parked there. He approaches her and he's wearing a mask. And then as he gets closer, he pulls the mask down and smiles at her. And immediately it stated that she felt relief. She felt relief. It's a person she recognizes. And then all of a sudden, Miller just appears from the rear and starts to swing this bat and begins to strike her about the head and about her upper torso. And they're into it at this point in time. I mean, I guess it's at this point that they knew that they had to go forward with what had happened. And after she is struck, she's taken off of the trail. Miller reports that he witnessed Goodale begin to continue to beat her with the same baseball bat off of the trail at this point in time. As a matter of fact, he had to come and take him away from the situation. It had actually been put forward that Goodale was, quote unquote, trying to put her out of her misery, as it were. When this is being documented all along by them and retroactively, they've talked about this on Snapchat, how they're going to plan this thing out. They're documenting it electronically. And then the big thing that they're faced with now is we've got a dead body. It's our teacher. What are we going to do? How do we obscure our presence here? And how do we obscure the body? Once death arrives, you're free of the pain of this world. I don't know how much pain Nohema endured in life. I know that she had a son that had issues physically and mentally, and she loved that child and took care of him. Her and her husband both did. Her husband, who she had been married to for a number of years, they were divorced, but yet they were great friends and still interacted with one another and their adult children. No one gets out of life pain free. That's the reality of it. But for her, life seemed to have been quite joyful. She certainly brought joy to a lot of the places that she went to. We've heard that over and over. But in her wildest dreams, I don't think she would have envisioned her life ending along a walking path in this little town in Iowa, and her mortal remains being abused by being drugged off into the weeds.
Joe, when you back up to her final day, that day, November 2nd, she was actually in a discussion where Chaiden actually was raising his voice in an argument with her over a grade, and that was seen by people at school. They saw him really being aggressive towards her about his grade. She does her normal routine and goes for a walk in the park, and that's the last time she is seen alive, is when she's going to do that. When she doesn't follow the rest of her normal routine, as you mentioned earlier, she goes to mass every day before going home. So it's school, walk, mass, home. And she was reported missing. It didn't take that long because of her routine to actually find her body. She was not missing for a very long period of time. As they meaning law enforcement, started looking into where the possible places she could be, they were able to find that she had gone to the park because witnesses actually saw her vehicle being driven away from the park.
Yeah, with two males in the vehicle. Yeah,
and that's a big catch here.
When these perpetrators drove away in her vehicle, and it was essentially abandoned down a road some distance away and was eventually found, but they're having to hoof it back to wherever it is their point of origin is, their respective homes. Now that they're faced with this idea, and this is so ridiculous, the body is still approximating the area where I'm just going to say it out loud, where they beat her to death with a baseball bat. They then take up a wheelbarrow, a tarp, and cross ties to cover her body and obscure her body along the trail. I guess thinking that the obscuring is going to wind up providing cover for them to a certain level. But here's the thing, every time in forensics you handle something, every time you try to make adjustments, that is the perpetrator in a scene, you're adding elements to this that you can be tracked with forensically, whether it's fingerprints or touch DNA, or just at a baseline ownership. Let's say that you got your wheelbarrow from Ace Hardware. Well, that wheelbarrow is unique to that particular brand. We can track that. Eventually, it might take some work, but we can track that. The tarp that you bought, I don't know where you bought it, but it's a very specific tarp, and we know the age of it. We can assess what lot it came out of, perhaps. And maybe if there's something that tarp has been used for before at your home that it specifically identifies and links it back to your home, that's transferred now onto the body from a forensic standpoint. We're going to collect that evidence. And when you consider what they had done to this poor public school teacher, Dave, and they beat her to death with this bat. Did they get rid of the bat? No. Did they get rid of their clothing? No. They took the clothing, the bat, bloody towels, all back home.
Right.
So how is it, I think that a lot of people will ask, what do you expect to happen here? Because when they're eventually found out, the investigators are going to find these items in the house. And that's one of these forensic tiebacks that we look for, Dave.
That's where the friend, as this story started breaking, as Mrs. Graber is missing and the town is looking for her, and a friend looks at Snapchat messages and says, this is crazy. They're involved and it's bad. It's one thing for young people to say they're going to do something weird or mean or whatever, but now it looks like they have done something, and this friend goes to police. That was the first thing. Police right away knew who their main suspects were, that it was these two boys, at the time, 16-year-olds. 16 years old. We're talking about Chaiden Miller. His name's Willard Miller, but he goes by Chaiden, and Jeremy Goodale. This friend gave the Snapchat stuff to police. Police looked at it and went, those are our boys. They went and did this. They got a search warrant. That's where they found the bloody stuff, the bloody clothing, bloody towel. But Joe, I want to back up to the murder scene.
Yeah.
We know that they beat her with a baseball bat. According to Chaiden claims that Jeremy also used the bat and beat her.
Yes.
But the only thing we really know is that Chaiden Miller beat her in the head. Now, she had to have been knocked unconscious at some point fairly quickly, I'm thinking. I don't know how many shots to the head you can take before you go unconscious, Joe.
Well, a lot of that depends on a couple of things relative to blunt force trauma. First off, it depends upon the strength that the individual possesses that's wielding this bat. We're talking about a relatively robust, healthy teenage male. He's got enough arm strength to do damage, enough upper body, because we know it's not just in the arms. It's the turning, it's the rotation of his hips. It's the wielding of the bat from several different, because you're not going to swing this thing most of the time like you swing it at the plate. Many times you'll see this kind of tomahawking motion that comes down with both hands where you're crashing down. Now, she's diminutive. She's not that tall. So automatically you've got leverage over her. It's an asymmetrical situation. You crash down on her from the back, okay? One of the things that's going to happen with that first blow is, you might not know this, but with the first blow, you're not necessarily going to have blood that's going to be transferred to the weapon. So you're going to break the skin, perhaps, that first blow. But when you begin to strike again, okay, and you rain down in that area where you may have lacerated the area, because lacerations arise from blunt force trauma, it's a tearing of the skin. The next time you draw that bat back, you're going to have a mass of blood. And because you're striking in the head, one of the other things that you're going to have is hair. And the hair, blood is so tacky. Everybody at home can identify the tackiness of blood. The hair actually is adherent to the bat per the blood that's there. And you take that away, well, that's an element of this poor woman's body that can be tied back to her. Now, the underlying trauma that she's sustaining is going to be not just these lacerated marks on her head. You've got the potential of skull fractures, particularly depressed skull fractures, as this barrel of that bat is hitting her. You've also got these kind of weird linear contusions that'll happen on the softer sections of the body, like I see them on the shoulders and the neck, where you start striking these soft tissues, and you get these with a bat in particular. A bat is kind of graduated out, closer to the handle, the more narrow it is. The further you get down the shaft of that bat, the wider it is. So you'll have this kind of V-shaped, it's almost a V-shaped pattern where the lines are kind of splitting off. That skin, as you rain down onto the skin with the bat, the skin actually, for a second, Dave, wraps up on the sides of the bat. So the contusion is going to look bigger than the surface of the bat. It's a weird thing. Matter of fact, I recommend anybody do this. Go online and look up videos of slow motion baseball pitches that are struck with a bat, and you will see that for a second, at that moment in time, when the bat makes contact with the baseball will actually flatten for a second. And if you pay real close attention, the sides of the baseball, just for an instant, now it's firmer than skin, will actually slightly bend around the bat and wrap. Well, imagine striking skin like that, and that's that contusion that you're going to get. So you'll get those contusions, you'll get underlying fractures, and you're pulling away this hair. These people, after they attacked her, Dave, never even bothered to clean the bat. So they took home elements of Nohema with them. They took elements of her body on their person in the form of their clothes. Maybe they had a towel. They were because they found a bloody towel. And this poor, precious woman, they found all that remained of her in this sense, as it relates to the murder weapon. They found all that remained of her in bloodstains and hair on the surface of this bat.
One thing you mentioned, Joe, linear skull fracture, and is it depressed skull fracture?
Yeah, what will happen is that you can have a depressed skull fracture. And the depressed skull fracture is unique because if you can concentrate enough energy with the item that someone is being bludgeoned with, it will kind of separate out the bone. Let me give you a good, for instance. We're coming into the holiday season now. And so people they get peanut brittle, okay? If you look at a piece of peanut brittle, it's not that much different than the external table of a skull. You can take a piece of peanut brittle and you can kind of lightly tap it with your hand on a firm surface, and you'll get this kind of splitting that carries on and it'll fracture, okay? If you hit it hard enough, though, you'll see that you can create almost this little island in it, and it fractures away from all the other areas of that piece of peanut brittle, and it'll create like a little plug of peanut brittle. That's a depressed skull fracture. If you can concentrate enough energy on that specific area, you'll literally plug the bone so that it is free floating from the rest of the table of the skull. It won't just be like this kind of curvilinear fracture that you get. And so that's one of the little nuanced things that you look for when you're trying to assess these injuries, at autopsy, which would have been done with Nohema's body.
Now, when we know that Jeremy Goodale was set to testify against Chaiden Miller.
Yes.
And I keep going back to the bat and Chaiden Miller being the one who was seen in the argument, arguing with his teacher. He's arguing with Mrs. Graber over his grade. We don't hear Jeremy having that same thing. Is there a way to tell who was swinging the bat?
I don't know that there's necessarily any physical way. I guess that first off, it would require quite a bit of calculus in order to be able to compute that, I think. But given the dynamic of the environment, it would be great if you could, perhaps think about, well, what's the maximum height Chaiden could have reached with the extension of his arms? One of the things that we do that has been done in cases past with attacks like this is that if you have a perpetrator that's wielding an instrument, many times you'll measure their arm length. We do this with the dead as well. We will measure arm length. For instance, the dead's ability to facilitate handling a weapon. If it's, say, a self-inflicted event, or if they're operating a vehicle, could they have reached the gear lever where they were positioned at? Or is it possible that they could have been in this position and sustained this particular injury? And a lot of that comes down to the measurements of the dimensions of the body. In this particular case, I don't necessarily know if it would be possible to scientifically prove that. And so based upon that, you're leaning heavily on testimonial and circumstantial evidence.
Joe, the reason I asked is Miller had claimed all along he didn't hit Mrs. Graber with a bat, but when it came right down to negotiations and a plea deal, they both pled not guilty at first. But Jeremy Goodale did cut a deal with prosecutors to take a plea and testify in court against his lifelong pal, Chaiden Miller. When Miller found out that, well, he cut a deal as well and pled guilty. It was the sentencing that showed me who was the major aggressor of these two. They were 16 years old at the time. They certainly knew better. But Jeremy Goodale got life with the possibility for parole after 25 years. Miller got life with the chance of parole after 35 years. But it still doesn't explain how they thought this was the answer to the problem of a bad grade.
I don't know that there really is a way to explain away the destruction of a life. But to kind of sum it up, I would like to say this. One of the Snapchat comments that had been posted merely said this: "Time to hide a body," showing the picture of a jug of Clorox. And a second post with a selfie stated, "POV, you're my Spanish teacher. And this is the last thing you see." Let that sink in just for a second. Because now these two perpetrators are behind bars for many, many years to come. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.